Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hello, Woo Crew, and welcome back to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am your host, Eileen, and I'm here today with a solo episode. And this episode, oh my goodness, I actually have notes, y'all. I rarely, if ever, have notes to accompany these solo episodes because they're primarily a reflection on my own experiences as I dance with the topics that we cover here of divine connection, of spirituality, of the mystical and the magical, and sometimes the far more practical as well. And today, I really wanted to make sure that the message, the insight that I'm bringing is powerful, because I had an experience as I record this. It's Friday, October 31st. It's Samhain Eve. And last night I held ceremony for many of you. We had 17 people, some in person, some online, some catching that recording, to sit in ceremony and celebrate this turning of the wheel, this shift from the light half of the year to the dark half of the year, this welcoming back of the Kailiach, that crone energy, that sovereignty goddess energy, that world creator energy of this female goddess. And one of the questions that I posed for us all to sink into and reflect on during ceremony really cracked something open for me. And so I'm going to share it, but I'm going to share it a little bit later on in the episode, because first I felt like it was time, or that this question really deserved a little bit of review or coming back around to talking about the archetype of the divine feminine. And one of my very earliest episodes, all the way back at the beginning of this podcast when I was co-hosting with Ellie, I believe it was episode 3, we had an episode where we talked about the archetypes of the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I'm not going to get into the divine masculine today. I do think it's worth revisiting, and so it's on my mind to bring it into another solo episode in the very near future. But today I want to talk about the archetype of the divine feminine. Hey Woo Crew, a brief interruption to invite you into an offer that feels extra potent at this time of year. As we move towards Samhain and through the deep stillness of November, the veil between worlds grows thinner. This is the time when messages, guidance, and insight flow more easily from the unseen realms, and that's what makes Soul Council sessions so potent right now. In these 45-minute guided journeys, I help you to call a council of your spirit guides, ask your questions, and receive the wisdom that is waiting for you. You'll leave with clarity, comfort, and a recording to return to anytime you need to reconnect. If you've been feeling the nudge to seek guidance, to ask what's next, or to feel your connection to the beyond, this is your sign. I've created a discount code for all of you to use through the month of November. If you enter Samhain15, that's SAMHAIN, and the number 15 at checkout, you'll receive 15% off towards your session. Book your Soul Council session now at myluminouslife.ca/soul-council-session and harness the magic of this liminal time. Today, I want to talk about the archetype of the divine feminine. She comes up often here, and often it's just alluded to, or we talk about a few of the aspects of what this archetype really means, or the embodiment of it. But I thought it would be lovely to kind of return and go through almost in a bit of a more teaching fashion for a little bit here. So let's talk about the word archetype. First of all, so the archetype of the divine feminine, it really has nothing to do with how we identify gender-wise, male, female, transgender, fluid, whatever it might be. This is an archetypal lens that we can apply to our lives, that everybody, regardless of their gender expression in this lifetime, carries. We all carry both the divine feminine and the divine masculine principles or archetypes within us. The world carries both. And they're not polarized ends of a spectrum. They are a spectrum, just like everything else in this life. But they're helpful in allowing us to understand ourselves more fully, perhaps. Archetypes themselves are patterns. They are universal, they are timeless, they are infinite, and they're both light and dark, right? They use imagery, or we use imagery, to try to capture what they are, but no image can fully capture them. If you know much about Jungian psychology, the psychology that he bases much of his work on is the psychology of archetypes, and they show up in our myths, in our stories, in our lives, in powerful ways that often we're not even fully aware of. And so the archetype of the divine feminine is one that people are leaning into more and more again today. It's one that has really been undervalued or underappreciated for a long time because the patriarchy, and I'm going to define a little bit what I mean by the patriarchy as well, but the patriarchy doesn't value the divine feminine. And that's why we are in such imbalance in our world. That's why we are living in this exploitive, extractive capitalism that just takes from the earth and from each other, because we've forgotten the divine balance, the reciprocity. In Celtic mythology, the king can only ever rule the land if he has the blessing of the sovereignty goddess. And there's a symbolic marriage in all of these myths, and for a long time as well in practiced history, the lived history of Irish and Scottish and other Celtic nations, was that the king went through a ceremonial divine marriage to the land, to the sovereignty goddess. And that was the only way he was a right and true king, was if there was that balance, that reciprocity, that connection between the feminine and the masculine. And so some of the characteristics of the divine feminine that have been devalued, and I'm sure it won't come as any surprise as you listen to me go through this list, they're all things that, like we like them to be present sometimes, but in terms of the valuation of them in our society, they fall pretty low. So the divine feminine is nurturing, right? That ability to care for and nurture both oneself and others with love and compassion. And of course, we value that in society. We want women especially to be nurturing, but we devalue it from a perspective of, I'm going to use monetary here, because nurturing roles, caregiving roles are devalued monetarily. The term just a stay-at-home mom has been made to seem like you're not living up to the things that make us worthy, quote unquote, or that we believe make us worthy in society. And even caregiving jobs, roles, nurses, midwives, home caregivers, they may earn less money than other roles with similar amounts of responsibility, if not less. Midwives make a fraction of what GPs who specialize in maternity care make. And so there's all these imbalances there, right? Yes, we want nurturing women, but we don't want to value them for it. Another one of the characteristics of the divine feminine, or that archetype, is intuition, which is that deep sense of inner knowing, right? The ability to tune into and trust your instincts and connect to that inner wisdom. And again, there is a desire to be able to connect to our intuition, but society does not value intuitive ways of knowing. Society values cold, hard facts, rational, reasoned, critical thinking, right? Pros and cons lists. And often that intuitive way of understanding or knowing doesn't have a pros and cons list, or at least it doesn't make sense when you look at it that way. And so that's part of what we're trying to recapture as we lean into the divine feminine. It's part of why it's so hard as well to do that, because we've been taught not to trust that inner voice. That's really linked in a lot of ways, or it feels similar to me, to emotional wisdom, right? Stop being so emotional. Be rational, think critically, all of those things. That emotional wisdom, the capacity to embrace and express emotions authentically and foster emotional intelligence and empathy. Again, they feel often like this nice to have. And once again, it is more acceptable, let's use that word, for women and people who identify as women in this society to be emotional. And when we are emotional, it is weaponized against us as a reason not to trust us or believe us, or that we're less capable, when really emotional wisdom is as important as rational thought. Another aspect of the divine feminine is creativity. And this one really, to me, is the heart of the divine feminine. It is the females that give birth in all of the beings on this earth, right? It is the female who creates new life. There is that innate generative, creative capacity within all of life. And in those beings that are sexed, it is the females that create that life. They can't do it alone. We need the masculine. Of course, there's that balance. And, that power to create, to innovate, and to bring forth new life, new art, new ideas, that is part of the divine feminine archetype. Again, archetype. Everyone holds it, which is why there are so many incredible male artists. They've tapped into that divine feminine aspect. Receptivity is part of the divine feminine. So being open to receive. And this one's so hard for so many of us. It doesn't feel safe. We've been taught to give, to give, to give. But many of us feel either scared or unworthy of receiving. And this is receiving of love, of abundance, of the gifts of the universe. It's not passive. We have to open to receive. We have to be active in a way to be able to receive. It's a decision. And it's a really hard one. Connection with nature is embodied in the divine feminine archetype. So recognizing that interconnectedness of all life and of having a reverence for and with the natural world. Nature, the earth throughout history, in so many different religious traditions and indigenous traditions, the earth is feminine, right? Mama Gaia, Mother Earth, the Great Mother. This seems to be a universal understanding. And so that natural, the connection with that energy force, that's part of embodying or embracing that divine feminine archetype. Empowerment lives here as well. I think this is a really big buzzword right now in the last several years for women empowering women, right? Embracing your inner strength, resilience. What's more resilient than the female body? Right? That birth canal represents that strength, that power, that resilience, that ability to bounce back, to birth and to nurture new beginnings. This is big power. And of course, community lives here as well. The divine feminine archetype is part of holding community together, of non-competition, lifting each other up. The sister wound that stems from that witch wound, that cutting other women down, internalized patriarchy is a lot of it. Pitting women against each other is one of the most devastating effects of living in the patriarchy, having had those witch trials. We've talked about the witch wound here many times. It will come back around again, I'm sure. But so the real embodied divine feminine is that non-competition, the understanding of the fact that we rise together. And so before I move into reflection on the question that came up, or that I included in our ceremony last night and what it unlocked for me, I do just want to reiterate or clarify again that term patriarchy. It gets thrown around a lot, and I suspect if you're here listening to me, you know that I don't mean men. Men are part of the patriarchy, and they're also negatively impacted by it as well. Yes, it benefits them in a lot of ways, but it also harms them. And so the term patriarchy is referring to a social, cultural, and political system in which power and authority are predominantly held by men, and men are generally the primary decision makers and the leaders in various aspects of society. So in a patriarchy, men do have greater access to resources, to opportunities, to privileges compared with women and gender fluid individuals or other identities. And in this system, we think about, even if you were raised without religion, say, like I was not raised in an overtly religious household. Both my parents had attended churches when they were younger, but as a family, we didn't have that kind of belief. But it doesn't matter. I was still raised in a society that is predominantly built and based around Christian values. And the idea of God the Father and being created in the image of God the Father, right? Man is created in the image of God the Father. Well, then who is woman created in the image of? Well, in this mythology, we're told that she is created of the rib of the man. And even though I wholeheartedly disagreed with this concept, it never felt even remotely okay to me even as a kid. There is still that permeation in the culture that tells us that men are the ideal, right? You got to make it in a man's world, like fit in with the boys, like toughen up. All of these things are really pervasive in our culture. And so, this has made it really part of society across the globe, not everywhere, but in much of the globe, because Christianity really did spread a long way, to live by these rules of the patriarchy. And that's kind of what is now considered the social norm. And it plays out in so many ways, right? We have the wage gap. We've got the gender gap. I already alluded to the fact that jobs that are traditionally women's work, service, caregiving, mothering, they are lower paid. And then even within those jobs, if you have a male nurse and a female nurse, the women are going to be lower paid. We have these social stigmas of being too emotional or weak or on your period, blaming our emotions and our hormones for getting in the way of doing our jobs the way we should again. And it's so interesting because, I've said before, they've done studies and little girls are actually far more capable of emotional regulation from a much earlier age than little boys. Little boys have a broader, more powerful spectrum of emotions. They don't regulate themselves as well. And yet it's the women, the girls, who are told they're too emotional. And so that's just one of the examples of how the patriarchy harms men, harms boys, right? Because can you imagine having that really strong emotional range and having it stuffed down and shut down and told that boys don't cry? And that's all a discussion to go into more when we drop into that space of divine masculine and how the patriarchy hurts all of us. This imbalance, this focus on the masculine as being the ideal. And when I say the masculine, some of the divine masculine certainly is idealized. That imbalance exists. Some of it is more toxic masculinity that's been idealized. And regardless, both being true, the divine feminine, that archetype, has been out of balance. It's not been idealized in any way. And we've lost a lot of that magic and that beauty and that comfort. And it shows up in, the jobs we have access to, the fact that women are the main person who takes maternity leave, putting our careers on hold, the expectation, right? That mom will be the one to take time off work to tend to children or family. We saw that play out during COVID so powerfully. We are judged by our looks. Taylor Swift talks about that in her song, If I Were a Man, and it comes up all the time for women. Imposter syndrome is huge. Women are far less likely in our society to apply for a job that they don't meet every single qualification for. Maybe they have 9 out of 10 of the qualifications and they won't apply because they believe that they're not a fitting applicant. Whereas a man who has maybe 6 out of 10 of those qualifications will likely apply and get the job because he applied. We often don't take those risks, put ourselves out there, apply. We end up with missed opportunities. There's so many ways this plays out. And so all of this kind of leads up or sets the groundwork for the way this question I'm going to share with you now really impacted me and unlocked something in me. And I've read this question before. I think I may even have brought it into our winter solstice ceremony last year, but it didn't land the same way as it did yesterday. So this question is coming from Jen Murphy of the Celtic Creatives. I want to give that credit there. And it's from a workbook or a PDF information book about the Cailleach. And so it felt really potent this time of year as the Cailleach returns. The question is this: consider the idea that you were created in the image of the divine feminine, the great mother, the sovereignty goddess. What does this possibility invite you to feel in your body? Who does it give you permission to be? And this question, I'm actually going to pause again there. If you are created in the image of the divine feminine, the great mother, the sovereignty goddess, what does this possibility invite you to feel in your body? Who does it give you permission to be? So this question unlocked something for me. And I'm reading now from what I was writing in my morning pages this morning. A wave of power and calm swept through me. It was like this massive permission slip to actually be a cyclical being, more so even than the permission I feel from the wheel of the year and that cyclical movement of nature. It was permission to be soft, to be emotional and intuitive, to be proud and powerful and bold, to walk my own path to the beat of my own drum, instead of constantly trying to push and force myself to do it the way everyone else is or has told me to. It feels incredibly liberating, comforting, empowering. And even though I've never consciously believed in God the Father, in whose image we are created, it cannot be denied that I live in a society that believes that. A society that has put man at the pinnacle of beings, the model to be aspired to for centuries upon centuries. The idea of being created in her image is one that has been lost to us for so long. And yet, it is one that our bones remember. In the faintest whispers and echoes of resonance, as we hear this idea and something inside us says yes. It's one that I would like to reclaim and begin to embody and to spread. And how do we do that? How do we reclaim this sense of being embodied in our divine feminine? It's not always easy. I don't know that it's ever easy living in the world that we live in. But our slow morning rituals, those moments we take for ourselves to check in with our hearts, writing or in prayer or in meditation, the ability to create time for an empty presence, asking for guidance, those mindfulness practices, and anything that nurtures your intuition, to allow yourself to begin to practice hearing it and being guided by it. I've spoken many times of the really simple intuitive practice of asking yourself if you want coffee or tea, if you're a coffee or tea drinker, or some other food or beverage. That's a really low stakes way to practice. Creating sacred space and time in your days and in your life. Solo adventures and practices, even though the divine feminine is very much community minded, there's that community aspect. Often to get in touch with her, to get in touch with that part of us, we need to allow ourselves incubation, time in the dark, literally and metaphorically, that womb space to remember that creative force that lives within us. And on the flip side, community gatherings with like-minded people, with women, especially healing that witch wound, healing that sister wound. You can connect by weaving the divine feminine into family rituals and ceremony. Ritual and ceremony in and of themselves have that creative magic part of them, right? And so bringing that into the way that you celebrate birthdays or major holidays or high holy days or, wheel of the year ceremony days, infusing them with this energy and the intention of the feminine, along with those everyday activities. I'm going to leave this here and let it percolate. It's a very interesting idea to sit with and play with. And I think probably especially so, maybe more powerfully so, if you were raised inside the Judeo-Christian religions, or maybe you still are there. And if you still are there within that Christian tradition and it is your belief and part of who you are and you are happy and nurtured in that space, I'm curious how you might play with this concept anyways, not to discredit God the Father, if that is your God, but to allow the percolation of what does that energy feel like in your body? And so maybe it's just for your connection with Mother Earth. Okay, Woo Crew. That's it for now. Thank you so much for being here with me this week. I always love having these conversations, spending this time with you. And as always, please go ahead, like, subscribe, rate, review, whatever platform you're on, and share this episode with a friend because it really helps get the word out. Okay, bye for now.